Tonight, we're looking at 3 alleged encounters separated by years and thousands of miles, yet all 3 witnesses describe remarkably similar events: glowing craft, missing time, unexplained physical effects, and the unsettling feeling that something intelligent was controlling the encounter. Welcome to Strange Encounters. In the autumn of 1957, 23-year-old Antonio Villas-Boas was working on his family's farm near São Francisco de Sales in Brazil. The harvest season was in full swing, and like many farmers trying to avoid the intense daytime heat, Antonio had taken to working long after sunset. His tractor would often continue across the fields well into the night, illuminated only by its own headlights and the stars overhead. Brazil was in the midst of an extraordinary wave of UFO reports. Newspapers carried stories of strange lights crossing the sky, mysterious craft seen over cities and countryside alike, and growing public fascination with the possibility that humanity might not be alone. Yet Antonio claimed he paid little attention to such stories. He was far more concerned with the work waiting for him each evening. On the night of October 15th, everything seemed routine. As Antonio guided his tractor through the fields, he noticed an unusually bright reddish light low in the sky. At first, he assumed it was simply another star, but something about it immediately caught his attention. Unlike the stars above, this object appeared to be moving. He watched as the light steadily descended toward the farm. The object grew larger with remarkable speed until it became clear that it was not a distant light at all, but a solid craft approaching his position. Antonio later described it as egg-shaped, supported by landing struts with a bright red glow at its front and numerous lights around its exterior. As the object settled onto the ground nearby, Antonio's first instinct was to flee. He accelerated his tractor, hoping to escape before the strange machine could reach him, but almost immediately the engine began to lose power. Before long, the tractor stalled completely, leaving him stranded in the darkness. Antonio abandoned the vehicle and began running across the field. He had only gone a short distance when several small humanoid figures emerged from the craft and intercepted him. Although shorter than the average adult men, they appeared physically strong and wore matching gray, close-fitting suits along with rounded helmets and heavy boots. Their eyes were visible through openings in the helmets, but they made no attempt to speak. Instead, they communicated only through gestures while firmly escorting him toward the waiting craft. Despite his efforts to resist, Antonio said he was unable to break free. A ladder extended from beneath the object, and he was taken inside. The interior of the craft surprised him. Rather than appearing crude or mechanical, it seemed clean, brightly illuminated, and carefully constructed. The walls were smooth and curved, and the rooms were connected by narrow corridors. Although he observed various instruments and panels, none resembled the controls he was familiar with. The occupants appeared to examine him methodically. His clothing was removed, and samples of blood were reportedly taken from his chin using an unfamiliar instrument. At one point, his entire body was covered with what he described as a clear liquid or gel before being led into another chamber. Throughout the examination, Antonio repeatedly tried to communicate with the beings, but they never responded with recognizable speech. Instead, they seemed to rely entirely upon gestures and expressions. As the examination continued, Antonio noticed a strong odor filling the room, unlike anything he had encountered before. The atmosphere became increasingly uncomfortable, and he recalled feeling confused about what was happening or why he had been brought aboard. Eventually, the occupants introduced a single female individual who differed noticeably from the others. According to Antonio, what followed became the most controversial part of his entire account. He later maintained that he was compelled into a brief, intimate encounter, believing afterward that it may have formed part of some unknown reproductive purpose rather than any emotional or personal interaction. He said the woman remained largely expressionless throughout the experience. Before leaving, she reportedly pointed first toward her abdomen and then upward toward the sky. Antonio interpreted the gesture as suggesting that if a child resulted from the encounter, it would belong with her people rather than on Earth. Whether that interpretation reflected her intended meaning or simply his own attempt to understand the gesture remains impossible to know. Soon afterward, the female occupant departed and the other beings returned. Antonio was escorted back through the craft and led outside. As he stood watching from the field, the landing supports retracted into the object. The craft rose silently from the ground, accelerated rapidly, and disappeared into the night sky, leaving him alone beside his disabled tractor. Only then did he begin making his way back toward home. In the hours and days that followed, Antonio reported a series of troubling physical symptoms. He suffered nausea, weakness, headaches, unusual skin irritation, and a persistent sensation of burning across parts of his body. Concerned about his condition, he eventually sought medical attention, and his account was later documented by investigators who specialized in the growing phenomena of UFO reports. His story quickly became one of the most unusual cases ever recorded. Unlike many earlier sightings that involved only mysterious lights or distant objects, Antonio described a prolonged close encounter involving physical contact, a medical examination, and interactions with occupants inside the landed craft. Whether his experience represented an extraordinary event, a psychological episode, or an elaborate fabrication has remained the subject of debate for decades. Skeptics have questioned aspects of his testimony, pointing to the lack of physical evidence and the extraordinary nature of his claims. Others have noted that Antonio consistently maintained his account throughout his life and appeared to gain little personally from telling it. Investigators have likewise disagreed over the significance of the physical symptoms he reported afterward, with no consensus ever being reached. Nearly 70 years later, the Antonio Villas-Boas encounter remains one of the most influential and controversial cases in UFO history. It introduced elements that would later appear in many reported abduction accounts, yet it also stands apart because it occurred years before such stories became widely known. Whether one views it as evidence of contact with an unknown intelligence, a misunderstood personal experience, or something else entirely, Antonio's account continues to challenge easy explanations. It remains a remarkable chapter in the long and often perplexing history of alleged encounters with the unexplained. In the mid-1970s, long before the internet, cell phone cameras, or viral UFO videos, people who believed they had witnessed something extraordinary often had nowhere to turn. One of the few places willing to listen was a small research organization operated by UFO investigator Robert Gribble. Gribble had spent years collecting reports of unidentified aerial phenomena, eventually creating what became known as the National UFO Reporting Center, a place where ordinary people could telephone investigators and describe encounters without fear of ridicule. Thousands of calls were recorded. Some came from police officers, some from pilots, others from frightened families or isolated witnesses who claimed to have seen something they could not explain. Many of the interviews were conducted only hours after the events themselves. Decades later, portions of those recordings survived through the preservation work of researcher Wendy Connors, who described the archive as the missing human element behind written UFO reports. One of the strangest recordings in that archive came from a young man living near Brownstown, Illinois. The date was January 5th, 1975, and according to the witness, what began as an ordinary afternoon in a rural field ended with him being taken aboard a craft unlike anything he had ever seen before. It was sometime between 2:30 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The witness was outside behind his family home near a field when he suddenly heard what he described as an electrical sound. Later, he compared it to the noise of electric motors. At first, he didn't know where the sound was coming from. Then, he turned around. Hovering nearby was a massive object. The witness estimated it to be roughly 100 feet in diameter, although he admitted distance was difficult to judge. He believed the object may have been around 2,500 feet away, but he wasn't certain. What he was certain about was the way it moved. The object drifted over his brother's house before approaching his position. Then, according to the witness, it suddenly reversed direction and moved back toward another field. It continued maneuvering between open clearings and tree lines, almost as though it was carefully navigating the landscape. At some point during the sighting, the witness began taking photographs. He later claimed he managed to take 6 pictures altogether. One image was reportedly so overexposed it could not be properly developed and was later sent for an additional analysis by a professional photographer in Illinois. Other copies were supposedly being prepared for UFO researchers, including investigators connected to astronomer and UFO researcher J. Allen Hynek. But before the witness could fully process what he was seeing, the encounter took a far stranger turn. According to the interview, he suddenly felt himself being pulled upward at tremendous speed. He could not remember passing through a doorway. There was no memory of climbing aboard the object. One moment he was standing in the field. The next, he found himself inside a circular room. The chamber was small, only about 5 feet across. Around the walls were strange glowing structures that the witness compared to camera lenses. They sat roughly at waist height and extended around the room as far as he could see. The lenses pulsed on and off with a soft orange glow. There was also a grated section in the floor that appeared to pulse in the same way. Inside the chamber, the witness discovered he could barely move. Only his head remained mobile. He estimated that he spent around 30 seconds inside the room, although later events caused him to question whether much more time had actually passed. The witness never reported seeing humanoid figures or alien beings directly, but he did describe an overwhelming sensation that someone or something was nearby inside the craft. He also stated there was no spoken communication, no voices, no commands, no obvious telepathic messages, only the strange feeling that he was not alone. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the experience ended. The witness found himself back on the ground near the same location where he had originally been standing. His camera was lying nearby in front of him. The craft was gone. At first, he believed the entire experience had lasted only 2 or 3 minutes, but according to his father, something didn't add up. After returning to the house, visibly shaken, the witness tried explaining what had happened. His father reportedly struggled to believe the story at first, but after seeing the condition his son was in, he began reconsidering. The father later suggested the young man may have been missing for as long as 45 to 50 minutes. That missing time would become one of the most disturbing aspects of the case, and there may have been another witness. According to the interview, a former neighbor visiting family roughly 3/4 of a mile north of the property reported seeing a glowing object maneuvering low in the sky at nearly the same time. The woman allegedly spotted the object while backing out of her parents' driveway with her husband before it suddenly disappeared. But the strange events didn't end with the sighting itself. In the days that followed, the witness claimed he had been experiencing recurring dreams involving the object. In one dream, he was lying in his bedroom when he heard a sound outside the house. When he looked out the window, he saw a craft circling the property. Terrified, he hid beneath his blankets. Other dreams reportedly followed, all centered around the same object. The witness also believed the encounter may have affected the family dog. Before the sighting, the Airedale had been nearby, near a creek roughly 100 feet away from him. But afterward, according to the witness, the dog's behavior changed noticeably. The animal reportedly became subdued and strangely lacking in enthusiasm, no longer reacting to things the way it once had. Meanwhile, the photographs taken during the encounter continued circulating among investigators, but today, the images themselves are difficult to trace. If they survived, they appear to have faded into obscurity along with the case itself. That may be part of what makes the Brownstown encounter so unsettling. Unlike many later abduction stories shaped by television, books, and decades of UFO mythology, this recording feels raw and uncertain. The witness never sounds polished. He frequently admits when he doesn't know something. He struggles to explain parts of the experience, and throughout the interview, there's a sense that he himself is still trying to understand what happened in that Illinois field on a cold January afternoon in 1975. Whether the encounter was psychological, misidentified, fabricated, or something genuinely unexplained remains impossible to determine. But preserved within the old recordings of the National UFO Reporting Center is the voice of a man who remained convinced that, for at least a brief period of time, he had been taken somewhere beyond ordinary human experience. In late November of 1961, along the coast of southern Brazil, a former police officer stepped out onto a quiet beach expecting nothing more than a sleepless night. Instead, he would later claim that he encountered something that would leave him disturbed for years afterward. The case would eventually become one of the lesser-known early humanoid encounters reported in Brazil, a story involving a glowing craft, strange figures, missing time, and an investigation that seemingly disappeared into history. The witness was Caballero Mendes, a retired member of the Porto Alegre police force, who had later become involved in real estate. In November of 1961, Mendes traveled to the beach of Pinhal, located in the Brazilian state of Rio Grande do Sul, roughly 100 miles from Porto Alegre. He was there on business, arranging vacation properties for clients, and was staying alone in a small beach house. That night was unusually warm. Unable to sleep, Mendes lay awake for hours, trying unsuccessfully to rest. Then something unusual happened. According to his later account, he felt an overwhelming urge to leave the house and walk along the beach. He could not explain where the feeling came from or why he felt compelled to follow it. He tried to ignore it, but eventually gave in. At around 9:30 in the evening, Mendes stepped outside and began walking toward the shoreline. Almost immediately, he noticed a bright light in the distance. At first, he assumed it was coming from a fishing boat or some kind of equipment being used by fishermen, but as he continued toward it, he realized the light was not coming from a boat. Something was resting on the sand. As he got closer, Mendes described seeing a large, glowing object with a disc-like shape. The strange feeling that had drawn him toward it became stronger. He later said that he felt almost unable to stop himself from approaching. Then, from behind the object, two figures appeared. Because of the intense light coming from the craft, Mendes said he could not clearly see their faces. However, he noticed that the figures appeared to be wearing helmets, which he compared to those worn by football players. At the moment, the reality of what he was seeing began to overwhelm him. Mendes decided he should leave. He later explained that he was not overcome with terror, but that the situation was so strange and unsettling that he wanted to retreat. But according to his account, he was unable to move. Mendes claimed that he received a kind of mental message from the figures. The message, as he later described it, was that resistance was impossible and that he should try to move if he doubted them. When he attempted to move his body, he found that he could not. He described himself as being completely frozen in place. The figures then approached him, and after that moment, his memory became unclear. The only fragment he could recall was a sensation of something touching his forearm, as if some kind of instrument was being used to scratch or examine his skin. The next thing Mendes remembered was being near his beach house again. He had no memory of walking back from the beach. When he looked toward the area where the object had been, the light was gone. He then checked his watch. It was 11:30 at night. Approximately 2 hours had passed since he left the house. For Mendes, the experience did not end when the object disappeared. According to investigators who later interviewed him, he began experiencing changes in his personality and emotional state. The once calm and controlled former police officer reportedly became anxious, withdrawn, and troubled by the memory of what had happened. For several months, he kept the story to himself. Eventually, however, he decided to tell someone. Because of his background and concerns about the unusual object he believed he had encountered, Mendes contacted two experienced investigators, retired Brazilian Air Force Captain F.V. Cardoso and Lieutenant Colonel W.C. Schneider of the Brazilian Army. Both men questioned him extensively about the event. After their investigation, they suggested that Mendes undergo hypnosis in an attempt to recover missing details from the experience, but Mendes refused, and without his cooperation, the investigation reached a dead end. The case might have remained forgotten if not for developments years later. In 1966, after the famous Betty and Barney Hill case brought international attention to reports of missing time and alleged encounters with strange beings, Brazilian researcher Helio Pereira Fontes decided to revisit the Mendes case. Fontes reopened his files and attempted to continue the investigation. According to reports later published by UFO researchers, Porto Alegre Police Chief Maialino also tried to convince Mendes to undergo hypnotic questioning, but no public record has ever surfaced confirming that the hypnosis took place. There are no known transcripts, no recovered memories, and no later interviews where Mendes provided additional details. The story simply fades away. Today, the Pinhal beach encounter remains one of Brazil's lesser-known humanoid UFO cases. Whether Mendes experienced something truly unexplained, a misinterpreted event, or something that occurred entirely within the realm of human perception is impossible to determine. But the details of his story are striking. A former police officer walking alone along a deserted beach, a glowing object resting on the sand, two mysterious figures emerging from the light, and a missing period of time that he could never fully explain. More than 60 years later, the final chapter of the Pinhal beach encounter remains unwritten. If you enjoyed the stories, be sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks so much to everyone for listening. I'll see you in the next episode of Strange Encounters.